Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the heart of the ancient city of Eldoria, where the whispers of forgotten spells wove through the air like the distant echoes of lost time, Eldrick sat alone in the dim light of his study. The aged wizard, once known for his unmatched mastery over the arcane arts, now found solace only in the brittle pages of ancient tomes. The world had moved on without him, leaving him behind with nothing but memories of a past marred by mistakes that haunted his every thought. The weight of those errors bore down on him like a mantle of despair. How many times had he replayed the moment in his mind? The battle against Malakar, the dark sorcerer who had threatened to plunge Eldoria into eternal darkness. Eldrick had been young, arrogant, confident in his powers, and sure of his victory. But arrogance had blinded him, and his mistake had cost him dearly. Friends had died, his family's honor had been tarnished, and the scars of that day remained etched into the very fabric of his being. His fingers trembled as they traced the runes on a faded parchment. The words seemed to blur and shift, as if the ink itself were alive, trying to escape his gaze. He had devoted years to this pursuit, searching for something, anything, that could undo the past. He had scoured the depths of forgotten libraries, delved into the most obscure corners of magical lore, all in the vain hope that he might find a way to rewrite history. It was on this night, in the dead silence of the ancient library, that fate intervened. A cold draught swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging Eldrick into darkness. He sat still, his heart pounding in his chest as he waited for the shadows to retreat. But the darkness persisted, a living thing that seemed to creep closer, suffocating the very air around him. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the draught ceased, and a faint glow appeared in the far corner of the room. Eldrick's eyes, accustomed to the gloom, narrowed as he peered into the darkness. The glow intensified, revealing a hidden passage that had not been there before, a narrow doorway carved into the stone wall, its edges pulsing with a soft, ethereal light. Caution tempered by curiosity, Eldrick rose to his feet, his joints creaking with the effort. He moved toward the doorway, his staff tapping softly on the cold stone floor. As he approached, the light grew brighter, beckoning him forward, drawing him in with an irresistible allure. The passage led to a staircase spiraling downward into the earth. Each step felt as though it were carrying him further from the world he knew, deeper into the unknown. The air grew colder, thicker, as though he were descending into a place forgotten by time itself. At the bottom of the staircase, Eldrick found himself in a cavernous chamber. The walls glistened with moisture, and the air was thick with the scent of ancient magic. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, and atop it, a swirling vortex of light and shadow, a rift in time itself. Eldrick's breath caught in his throat as he approached the rift. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a tear in the very fabric of reality, pulsating with the energy of countless moments trapped within its grasp. Time itself seemed to bleed from the rift, the past and the future colliding in a maelstrom of possibilities. He reached out, his hand trembling, and the rift responded, expanding and contracting as if aware of his presence. Eldrick could feel the power radiating from it, a raw, untamed force that held the potential to rewrite history. This was it, the answer he had been seeking for so long. Here, in this forgotten chamber, lay the means to undo his past mistakes. But with that realization came a flicker of doubt. Was it right to tamper with the past? Could he bear the consequences of altering the course of history? The weight of those questions hung heavy in the air, but the desperation in Eldrick's heart drowned out the voice of caution. He placed his hands on the edge of the pedestal, feeling the surge of energy pulse through his veins. With a deep breath, he focused his mind, drawing upon the ancient knowledge that had once made him one of the most powerful wizards in Eldoria. The rift responded to his will, expanding until it engulfed him in its light. Time slowed, the world around him fading into a blur of motion. Eldric's consciousness drifted, unanchored from the present, as he allowed himself to be pulled into the rift, back through the endless corridors of time, seeking the moment that had haunted him for so long that he found himself standing in the midst of a great battlefield, the sky darkened by the smoke of war, the ground littered with the fallen. Eldric recognized the scene instantly. This was the day of his greatest failure, the battle against Malachar. The younger version of himself stood nearby, his eyes blazing with confidence, his robes billowing in the wind as he prepared to unleash his magic against the dark sorcerer. Eldric watched in silence, his heart heavy with the memory of what was about to unfold. Malachar, wreathed in shadows, advanced with a malevolent grin, his own dark magic crackling in the air around him. The battle played out just as Eldric remembered, his younger self launching a powerful spell that Malachar effortlessly deflected, retaliating with a curse that struck down Eldric's closest friend, Lyra. The sight of Lyra's lifeless body, crumpled on the battlefield, was too much to bear. Eldric stepped forward, his hands trembling with the power of the rift still coursing through him. This time, he would change the outcome. This time, he would save her. With a wave of his hand, he redirected the younger Eldric's spell, amplifying its power tenfold. Malachar's eyes widened in shock as the spell struck him, tearing through his defenses and sending him crashing to the ground. The dark sorcerer let out a final, defiant scream before his body disintegrated into ash, leaving nothing behind but the echoes of his defeat. The battlefield fell silent, the tide of the battle turned in an instant. The younger Eldric, oblivious to the intervention of his future self, stood victorious, his friends rushing to his side, cheering in triumph. Lyra, alive and unharmed, embraced him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Eldric watched from the shadows, a bittersweet smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He had done it, he had changed the past. He had saved Lyra, redeemed his honor, and defeated Malachar before the dark sorcerer could inflict further harm. But as he returned to the present, a sense of unease began to settle in his chest. The rift had returned him to the world he had altered, but something was not right. The city of Eldoria was indeed more prosperous than ever, its people thriving in a time of peace and abundance. Yet, beneath the surface, there were signs that all was not as it should be. At first, the changes were subtle. The sky seemed a shade too bright, the shadows a fraction too deep. People moved through the streets with an unnatural precision, their smiles just a bit too wide, their laughter ringing hollow. Eldric could feel it in the air, a tension that simmered beneath the surface, waiting to explode. As the days passed, the anomalies grew more pronounced. Time itself seemed to warp and twist, the sun rising and setting at erratic intervals, the flow of days no longer following the natural order. Eldric began to notice moments of déjà vu, events repeating themselves with slight variations, as though the world were caught in a loop, struggling to maintain its balance. Buildings flickered in and out of existence, entire streets shifting between eras. One moment, the architecture was modern and pristine, the next, ancient and crumbling as if centuries had passed in the blink of an eye. People he had known for years would suddenly forget who he was, their memories erased by the distortions of time. The tipping point came when Eldric's old friends, the ones he had saved in the battle against Malachar, began to suffer inexplicable fates. Lyra, who had been so full of life, aged rapidly overnight, her once vibrant hair turning white, her skin wrinkling as though the years had caught up to her in an instant. Others vanished without a trace, lost to the voids that had begun appearing throughout the city, pockets of nothingness that swallowed everything in their path. Panic gripped Eldoria as the temporal disruptions grew more severe. The city, once a beacon of magic and prosperity, was collapsing under the strain of the altered timeline. The balance of reality had been shattered, and Eldric knew that he was to blame. Desperate to undo the damage he had caused, Eldrick returned to the rift. The chamber beneath Eldoria had changed, the once stable vortex now a seething, chaotic storm of light and shadow. The rift had grown unstable, its edges fraying as it struggled to contain the countless timelines that had been spawned by Eldrick's interference. There was only one way to fix what he had broken, to find the original timeline, the one where he had not meddled with the past. But to do so, Eldrick would have to travel through the rift once more, to navigate the endless web of possibilities and find the single thread that would restore balance. Summoning the last of his strength, Eldrick stepped into the rift. The sensation was even more disorienting than before, the rush of time and space tearing at his mind as he was flung across countless timelines. Each one was a potential reality, a world shaped by different choices, different outcomes. That he found himself in a desolate wasteland, the sky a sickly yellow, the ground cracked and barren. This was a timeline where Malachar had never been defeated, where Eldoria had fallen to darkness. The city lay in ruins, its once great towers reduced to rubble, the streets choked with the bones of the dead. Eldrick shuddered at the sight. This was a world without hope, a reality where his failure had led to the utter destruction of all he had loved. He knew he could not linger here, but the sight of the devastation burned itself into his memory, a reminder of the price of unchecked power. The rift pulled him onward, through countless other timelines. In one, magic had never existed, and Eldoria had become an industrialized city, its people cold and disconnected, their lives governed by machines and logic. In another, Eldoria was a utopia, a world of peace and prosperity, but at the cost of individual freedom. The people were happy, but their joy was hollow, their creativity stifled by the rigid control of an all-powerful government. Eldrick saw timelines where he had never become a wizard, where he had lived a simple life as a farmer or a scholar. He saw worlds where he had died young, where he had never met Lyra, where Malachar had never existed. Each reality was a reflection of a different choice, a different path, but none of them were right. In every timeline, something was missing. The balance was off, the world out of harmony. Eldrick began to realize that the imperfections of the past were crucial to the present. His mistakes, as painful as they were, had shaped him, had shaped the world in ways that could not be undone without consequences. He needed to return to the original timeline, to accept the mistakes he had made and let them stand. But finding that single thread of reality in the endless web of possibilities was like finding a needle in a haystack. The rift was a labyrinth of time, each twist and turn leading to another dead end, another reality that was not his own. As Eldrick's strength waned, he found himself back at the moment he had altered, the battlefield where he had defeated Malachar. But this time, he did not step forward. He did not intervene. He watched as his younger self made the same mistake, as Lyra fell, as the battle was lost. The pain of that moment was almost unbearable, but Eldrick forced himself to endure it. He had to let it happen, had to let the timeline play out as it was meant to. Only then could he hope to restore balance. The rift began to close around him, the threads of time pulling tighter as the moment of decision approached. Eldrick knew what he had to do. He had to return to the original timeline, but the rift would demand a price for his interference. As the final moments of the battle played out, Eldrick stepped into the rift one last time. The vortex closed around him, the light dimming as the rift sealed itself. Eldrick felt the fabric of reality shift, the countless timelines collapsing into one, the correct one. As the world began to heal itself, Eldoria returned to the way it had been before. The temporal anomalies vanished, the city stabilized, and the people resumed their lives, unaware of the chaos that had nearly consumed them. But Eldrick was gone, erased from existence, his sacrifice the final price for the restoration of the timeline. In the heart of Eldoria, in the city square, a new statue stood. It depicted a wizard, his face obscured by a hood, his staff raised in a gesture of protection. There was no name, no inscription, just a sense of peace and gratitude that lingered in the air. The people of Eldoria felt it too, a quiet sense of peace and gratitude that they could not explain. They had no memory of the man who had saved them, but deep down, they knew that someone had sacrificed everything to ensure their world remained whole. The statue stood as a silent guardian, a reminder of the sacrifices made to protect the balance of time. And though Eldrick was gone, his legacy lived on in the hearts of those he had saved, a legacy of redemption, sacrifice, and the enduring power of time.